Junko Furuta was a 17-year-old high school student in Tokyo, living the life of a normal teenager in 1988. She was bright, beautiful, and had her entire future ahead of her. Known for her kind personality and good grades, Junko was the type of girl everyone admired. She wasn't the kind of person who sought trouble or even hung around with the wrong crowd. But all of that didn't matter to the four monsters who would turn her life into a nightmare. It all began on November 25, 1988. Junko was walking home from school when she was ambushed by Hiroshi Miyano, an 18-year-old boy with a dangerous reputation. Hiroshi wasn't just a delinquent. He was tied to the Yakuza, Japan's infamous organized crime syndicate. He had noticed Junko before and had made up his mind to target her. That evening, Hiroshi and his gang devised a plan to abduct her. As Junko walked along a quiet street, Hiroshi approached her, pretending to be a stranger in need of help. She hesitated, but before she could react, Hiroshi and his gang members dragged her into a nearby alley. They forced her onto a motorcycle and took her to a house belonging to one of the boys, claiming she would be released if she cooperated. But it was all a lie. That house would become Junko's prison for the next 44 days. At first, Junko's parents were frantic when she didn't come home. They called the police and began searching for her. But Hiroshi and his gang forced Junko to call her parents, telling them she had run away and was staying with friends. To make sure the story seemed believable, they made her sound calm and convincing. The police closed the missing persons case, and just like that, any hope of her being found was gone. What Junko endured over the next 44 days is almost impossible to imagine. Hiroshi and his three accomplices, Joe Ogura, Nobuharu Minato, and Yasushi Watanabe, subjected her to unimaginable torture. They beat her daily, raped her repeatedly, and forced her to endure hours of humiliation and abuse. They burned her with cigarettes, poured hot wax onto her skin, and even set parts of her body on fire. They shoved foreign objects into her, laughing as they inflicted more and more pain. Junko was kept locked in a room, often tied up and barely fed. The boys used her as their personal plaything, inviting others to come over and join in the abuse. Over 100 people were said to have participated in or witnessed what happened to Junko, but not a single one of them tried to help. Even the parents of one of her captors, who lived in the same house, turned a blind eye to the horrors happening under their roof. They later claimed they were too afraid of their son's gang connections to intervene. As the days dragged on, Junko's condition worsened. Her body was covered in bruises, burns, and deep cuts. She was so badly beaten that she couldn't even stand or move properly. The boys broke her spirit along with her body, forcing her to do things like eat cockroaches and drink her own urine. They laughed as they watched her suffer, treating her less like a human being and more like a source of entertainment. On January 4th, 1989, the 44th day of her captivity, Junko's nightmare came to an end, but not in the way anyone would hope. That evening, Hiroshi and his gang challenged her to a game of mahjong. Despite everything, Junko managed to win. That small act of defiance enraged them. They beat her with iron bars, dropped heavy weights onto her stomach, and set her legs on fire. They punched her repeatedly, slammed her head against the ground, and continued to assault her even after she lost consciousness. Junko succumbed to her injuries, her body finally giving out after 44 days of unimaginable suffering. When the gang realized Junko was dead, panic set in. They had never intended for her to die, at least not yet. They scrambled to cover their tracks. Wrapping her body in blankets, they placed it into a large drum. They then filled the drum with wet concrete, sealing it shut as if they could bury the evidence along with her. Once the drum hardened, they transported it to a vacant lot and left it there, thinking no one would ever find her. For a time, it seemed like they would get away with their crime. But just 2 weeks after Junko's death, one of the boys bragged about what they had done to a friend. The friend, unable to stay silent, went to the police. Authorities launched an investigation, and soon after they found the drum containing Junko's remains. The condition of her body revealed the full extent of her suffering. Every bruise, burn, and broken bone told the story of 44 days of unimaginable horror. The police arrested Hiroshi Miyano and the other boys soon after. During the interrogations, the gang showed little remorse. Hiroshi even tried to claim that Junko had willingly participated in some of the acts, a sick attempt to paint himself as less guilty. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. The details of Junko's captivity and torture emerged during the trial, shocking not just Japan, but the entire world. What enraged the public even more than the crime itself was the punishment, or lack thereof. Because Hiroshi and his accomplices were all minors at the time of the crime, they were tried as juveniles. Hiroshi, the ringleader, received the harshest sentence, 20 years in prison. The others received sentences ranging from 4 to 10 years. None of them served their full terms. By the mid-2000s, every one of them was free to walk the streets again. The injustice didn't end there. After their release, several of the boys returned to criminal behavior, continuing to terrorize others. Meanwhile, Junko's family was left to grieve, knowing that the people who had stolen their daughter's life had faced only a fraction of the punishment they deserved. The leniency of the sentences became a national scandal, sparking debates about Japan's juvenile justice system and how it fails to hold young offenders accountable for the most heinous crimes. Junko Furuta's story is more than just a tale of unimaginable cruelty. It's a stark reminder of the evil that can thrive when people choose to stay silent. Over 100 people witnessed or knew about what happened to her, and not one of them stepped in to help. It's a story that forces us to confront not just the darkness of the perpetrators, but the apathy of everyone who stood by and let it happen. Even decades later, Junko's story continues to haunt those who hear it. Her name has become synonymous with the fight against injustice and the need to protect the most vulnerable among us. Junko Furuta should be remembered not just for the tragedy of her death, but for the life that was stolen, a life that was full of dreams, potential, and everything she could have been. Her memory lives on as a reminder to stand up for what's right, to speak out against evil, and to ensure that no one else ever has to endure the horrors that she did.